It's very popular among the Russian people because Russian children are historically taught that Ukraine is Russian. 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 Was established in the 850s when I was a graduate, and it was actually in Ukraine. So here Germany had all this gigantic territory and had never lost a war. It was also fighting in the Middle East too, and did very well under Rommel and the Panzer Division, the latter period, until Stalingrad. And here, with Stalin as the leader, but not as a military leader, but as a political figure, the Russians held off the Germans for over a year and ultimately defeated them in the Battle of Stalingrad, 1943, the first major defeat of the Nazis in World War II. So I just want to reiterate here. The Soviets pushed the German army out of Eastern Europe. They tried to move all the way from Stalingrad and kept pushing the Germans out. And by the way, this was a major, we'll talk about this briefly, but a major mistake of Hitler. Hitler made only 2 or 3 major mistakes during the war, but they were crucial mistakes. One was when the United States, I think I discussed this last time, but if not, we'll get to it again. When the United States declared war on Japan after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, there was a triumvirate treaty among the sort of Berlin, Rome, Tokyo axis of Germany, Italy, and Japan. When the U.S. declared war on Japan, Germany then declared war on the United States. This was a major mistake because otherwise the United States would not have fought Germany. One of the whole points that Churchill had in mind the entire time of the war was to get Germany involved in a 2-front war: an Eastern war against the Soviet Union and a Western war against the U.S. and Allied powers. So there was what they call unforced error. So completely unforced error by Hitler was to declare war on the U.S. after the U.S. declared war on Japan. A second major mistake was stopping the aerial bombardment of Britain. They were suffering substantial losses of bombers compared to the Spitfires of Britain. But probably they could have worn Britain down if they wanted to. And Hitler decided, over the objections of some of the military staff, to stop the fighting, stop the bombardment of Britain, and instead invade Russia with the Soviet Union, which they did in June of '41. And invading Russia, an 11 time zone country, was again, excessive on Germany's part. So those 3 mistakes: declaring war on the U.S., stopping the bombardment of Britain, and invading the Soviet Union, leading to Churchill's aim of Germany having to fight a 2-front war, were the crucial mistakes that Hitler made. We talked briefly about some of the summit treaties, the summit meetings. Here's one very famous in Yalta with Churchill. There is Roosevelt and Stalin. And this is in February '45 when the Germans were already in very bad shape before they surrendered. It was also just 2 months before Roosevelt died. Roosevelt died in April of '45. And then the following meeting, I think I mentioned last time, was in Potsdam, Eastern Germany. Churchill was defeated in the British elections, and he was replaced by Clement Attlee, the Labour leader. Roosevelt had died, and he was replaced by his vice president, Harry Truman, who became president, and there was Stalin again as the leader of the Soviet Union. By this time, July 45, the Germans had surrendered. They surrendered May 8, 1945. Hitler committed suicide at the end of April, and they surrendered in May 45. The meeting now here was about the resolution of the political arrangements in Europe, but also about how to deal with the Japanese. Okay, thank you. Then we come again, just to repeat, to the two bombings, August 6th and August 9th, 45, the air bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Again, the rationale by Truman was shock effect to so disturb and upset the Japanese leadership, with the implication that we had a whole other inventory of bombs that could destroy every major city in Japan, which we did not, with no other bomb. But the idea was the shock effect would reduce the surrender of Japan, which it did. Here is the actual headline of the New York Times in August. And this is actually another interesting feature that sometimes is forgotten. The Soviet Union, while fighting the Germans since they were invaded in 41, had been neutral against Japan the entire war. There was never any conflict between the Soviet Union and Japan. After the Hiroshima bombing on August the 6th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and attacked Manchuria, and then came the bombing of Nagasaki. Japanese, the Soviet textbooks of the time, for the history of the war was no mention of the August 6th Hiroshima bombing. The first mention is Russia declares war on Japan August 8th, and Japan surrendered on August 15th. So one is factually wrong, we could say somewhat incomplete. So, sure. And in meetings with the Russians over many years that I've been involved in some of them, the Russians have never attributed the surrender of Japan to the bombings of the Soviet because the Soviet Union declared the war on Japan. By the way, this is some of the issues of this are unresolved to this day. There are northern islands of Japan have been claimed and occupied by the Soviet Union and now Russia ever since 1945. They remain occupied today. It's an outstanding issue with Russian-Japanese relations. Any questions or issues about this early history? Now, what quickly happens is that as a product of the summit meetings, it became clear that Stalin had aspirations to, at a minimum, control the eastern countries that the Red Army had occupied in pushing the Germans back out. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Eastern Germany, Romania, Bulgaria. And these countries all became the members of the so-called Warsaw Pact, which was the counterpart by the Soviets to NATO. They were all Soviet controlled, they were all communist government run. and there was no, very limited interaction between any of these countries and the West during the entire Cold War. And the Cold War was very roughly from 1947 to 1991. When Churchill was out of government, he came to the United States. He was invited to a small college in Missouri, largely unknown now, except for the people from that college, called Westminster College in March '46. So that's like less than a year after the Germans surrendered. And in this college, Churchill gave a commencement speech, which is recorded and it's replayed all the time. Sorry about it. It's okay. This is a quote from Churchill's commencement speech at Westminster College. I can't quite the people. It's information from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic. An iron curtain has descended across the continent. There's Stettin up there, Trieste here. And this became a famous phrase, the Iron Curtain, associated with the Cold War. Yes.
So, did the United States and Britain know that the Yugoslavia was not going to be part of Russia?
So Yugoslavia was a kind of gray area. It had been unified under Tito, who was a great anti-Nazi Yugoslav patriot, but he was a communist. But he never wanted to be fully integrated into the Warsaw Pact with the Soviet Union. And I remember, I've been around a few years, early in my career, going to meetings where they said, after Tito, what will happen to Yugoslavia after Tito? Because Tito could hold Yugoslavia together. And of course, the answer we now know is, after Tito, no Yugoslavia. Because the countries of Yugoslavia is now divided among all these other states. Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenia, the home of Melania Trump, Montenegro. Tito had unified all these states as one country, Yugoslavia. But after he died in the 80s, it split off, and then there was a big civil war in the 90s that Clinton had to deal with. So that's why Yugoslavia has a shaded facade here. It's close to but not integrated into the Warsaw Pact. I may have mentioned, or maybe it was my other class, my family and I visited Yugoslavia. The famous tourist area of Yugoslavia is Dubrovnik. Have you been to Dubrovnik? Beautiful city. It was bombed to smithereens during the Civil War. And Dubrovnik is not that far from the Albanian border. Albania is the poorest country in this whole region. And I remember we wanted to enter Albania, citizens, just as tourists. And we were informed that we could not do that. Albania would not accept any Americans. This was in the early 70s, into Albanian territory. And the guard, I remember saying to us, you won't like it anyway, because there were no paved roads in Albania. Not a single road was paved. I think there are some now, but not that many. Albania also had a very peculiar relationship with the Russians. never actually fully integrated into the Warsaw Pact either. Now, here we move on to one of the major core concepts of the Cold War, and it's still a very active one today, called containment. There's a very prominent figure, George Kennan. He came from the Middle West. He was an early Foreign Service officer of the United States. Remember, in the 30s and the 20s, the U.S. was isolationist. You didn't have full diplomatic relations with many countries. He became a student of Russian, and he was appointed to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. The Russian Revolution was in 1917. The communists unified the country by 1921. All the three Republican American presidents of the 1920s refused to have diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. So the U.S. was actually the last major industrialized country to have diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. That was in 1933 when Roosevelt became president. And that's when we opened up an embassy in Moscow. And Kennan was appointed like the second secretary in the embassy, high up but not the top. He wasn't the ambassador. But he had a window on Moscow from the early 30s right through to the post-World War II period. In 1946, he drafted an article while serving Foreign Service officer, but he didn't and he could not have his name attached to the article. So it was published in Foreign Affairs, this quarterly journal, which is a very prominent journal to this day, that heads of state and other prominent people write about. July 47, it was $1.25 per copy, cost more than that. And this is the so-called X article. No one knew who wrote it. In Foreign Affairs in 47, the official title of it was The Sources of Soviet Conduct. Here he was Deputy Chief of Mission of the United States to the Soviet Union, 44 to 46. And in the attachments that are provided on the B courses,
Yes.
you have a copy of that article. That says, make sure you read the B courses attachment. Now, I guess we gotta show that. So, yeah. So, in the attachment, first of all, Kennan writes beautifully. He wrote majestically, and I bet any of you read the attachment? How many of you read it? Nobody, not a single person. Please read the attachment. It's also Soviet conduct. It's on B courses. On page B8, there, right there, I highlighted this sentence because this is the core sentence that's remembered from this article. In these circumstances, it is clear that the main element of any U.S. policy with the Soviet Union must be that of a long-term, patient, but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies. What Kennan maintained was that the Russian and Soviet communist system was inherently and instinctively expansionist. But they said to themselves, we have an alternative system of government to the Western capitalism. It involves the government owning all the means of production. The way in which the Soviet Union can continue to justify its legitimacy is to continue to show the expansion of communism. Communism must continue to expand. And if it doesn't expand, It will face tremendous internal opposition to its maintenance. So Kennan said, we don't need to defeat it, we just need to contain it, we need to box it in and stop it from expanding. And if we could stop it from expanding, this would lead to internal change within the Soviet Union, which would alter their expansionist tendencies. Now, one of the interesting issues here is, what does one mean? What did Kennan mean by the phrase, a long-term patient but firm and vigilant containment of Russian tendencies? Did that mean military containment? Did it mean economic containment? Did it mean political, psychological containment? This triggered a huge debate in the United States. What did Kennan mean by containment? The U.S. ultimately adopted the containment policy, but different individuals had different interpretations of what Kennan meant. And it's ironic that that one of the core defense figures at the time was a man named Paul Nitze, N-I-T-Z-E. And Nitze was a hawk on the Soviet Union all those years. In the late 40s, right after this article was published, the Secretary of State was Dean Acheson. And Acheson appointed Nitze as head of the policy planning staff in the State Department, where Kennan was thought to be the leading figure. And Nitze and Kennan argued vehemently over what Kennan meant by his definition of containment. Nitze said to Kennan, you don't understand what you meant by containment. It's largely a military policy. And Kennan said, no, it's not a largely military policy. It has to deal with economic aid, it has to deal with diplomacy. It's a much more diverse set of tools to use. Nitze and Kennan became huge rivals and never really patched up their differences the rest of their lives. Kennan didn't die until age 104, and Nitze died about 98 or 100. So this was for decades, so way after the Cold War was over, they continued to dispute with each other what Kennan meant by that phrase. Sorry, take your hand away. Yes, of course. Yeah, no, Nitze, I had some involvement in Tangled with Nitze. He was a rather confident fellow. And it's not surprising that he would tell someone that that person didn't know what he was talking about, what he himself had written. When we get into Capricorn Campus City Tax, I'll tell you another anecdote I had. That barely survived. So, this is the history of it, which seems like musty old history, 1947. That makes it, 73 years ago. But it's relevant today because containment is a key policy of U.S. national security strategy today. It deals with policies against China, against Russia, against Iran. The idea of containing an expansion's adversary is a core element of U.S. policy. Any other questions or comments about this? And here we return to Kaplan. This is the man who spends his first part of the book writing about Bernard Brodie. Brodie had come out of college and graduate school at the University of Chicago, an expert on naval power. He wrote a book on naval power. But he then, if you read the first part of Brodie, he writes that the atomic bombs dropped. Brodie said everything I've worked on is worthless now. That's a bit of an overstatement. but he was one of the first intellectuals to grapple with the meaning of nuclear weapons. And one of the things he did was he co-authored and co-edited this book, The Absolute Weapon, in 1946. This is the first book on nuclear weapons in the nuclear age. Brody had written in an essay in this book, these weapons must never be used. They only are for coercion and political purposes. Now, you know, if we had met here in 1947, after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I would say to you, what's the likelihood of no nuclear weapons being used in the next 70 years? I don't know what you would have thought, but my answer would have been 0 chance. Yes, sir. Would you have your hand up? No. So this is itself an extraordinary non-development. Tom Schelling, a Nobel laureate in economics who wrote major works on strategy that we discussed in my other class, when he had his Nobel Peace Prize in 2005, he spoke and said that the greatest development since the end of World War II was the absence of use of nuclear weapons in the 60 some odd years. Completely counterintuitive. And Schelling spent most of his time on the coercive and political purposes of nuclear weapons. In 1953 was the first enunciated U.S. nuclear weapons policy. We went from 45 to 53 without any public statement about what our overall policy was for nuclear weapons. And something quite important had happened back in 47, which is not listed here. And that was Congress passed the National Security Act of 1947. And this was a very important congressional act because it established 4 key elements. It established the Central Intelligence Agency, the first formal U.S. Intelligence agency after the war. During the war, we had the Office of Strategic Services. But we never had a major intelligence service during peacetime. In fact, there was a famous phrase by Henry Stimson, who was Secretary of War under Roosevelt, when he was asked why does the U.S. have an intelligence service, and he said, "Gentlemen do not read other people's mail." It's likely the work of Mark. In addition to the Central Intelligence Agency, the Joint Chiefs of Staff was created in 1947. Before that, we had the Chief of Staff of the Army was the chief military officer. But after the Second World War, with the delivery of atomic bombs by airplanes, the aircraft, which were part of the Army Air Corps, was separated into a separate service, the U.S. Air Force. So the Air Force was established as a separate service in 1947. 1946 it didn't exist, 1947 it did exist. In addition, there was an orchestration of the military leadership under the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which meant that there was a Chief of Staff of the Army, Chief of Staff of the Navy, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and a Commandant of the Marine Corps, and they collectively became the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There was a separate man on top of all of them. And that's the system we have to this day, Joint Chiefs of Staff. And finally, there was created the National Security Council, the NSC, which became an advisory group of key analysts to the cabinet, which in turn advised the president on national security issues. This was Truman's way of gearing up Well, it looked like it was going to be a long struggle with the Soviet Union Cold War. Not necessarily a military struggle, but a geopolitical struggle. So again, National Security Act of 1947, it's out from the U.S. Air Force, CIA, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and National Security Council. That's not featured much in Kaplan's book, but it's quite important. Still, though, without any declared U.S. nuclear weapons policy. In 1952, Truman had been very unpopular because the Korean War had been going on for a couple of years without resolution. Both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party courted the top American general, Dwight Eisenhower, to be their candidate. And the Republicans won out in the recruitment. And Eisenhower ran for the Republican nomination and defeated Robert Taft, a conservative Republican from Ohio, to be the Republican nominee. Truman decided not to run. And instead, the Democrats nominated a liberal Democratic governor from Illinois, Adlai Stevenson, in 1952. So the 1952 presidential election was Eisenhower against Stevenson. Eisenhower won that election handily. By the way, they ran against each other again in 1956, and Eisenhower became even more bad in 1956. In general, in case you're interested, that this is the time of presidential elections, if you look carefully at American electoral politics, the U.S. is not a super liberal country. It is not a super liberal. They've never elected a super liberal left-wing president in our history, not since Washington. Okay? Stevenson was an example of a liberal Democrat. George McGovern ran against Nixon in 1972. He won one state. One state. May be very popular in Berkeley cafes. It doesn't even work in Fresno. Okay. So Eisenhower was elected to office in 1953, and he appointed as the Secretary of State a prominent figure from financially well-off family, the Dulleses. And Secretary of State Dulles in 1953 enunciated the first U.S. nuclear declaratory policy doctrine of massive retaliation. And the policy said in plain terms that if the Soviet Union expanded even peripherally in areas around the Soviet Union, so they went to Burma, the U.S. would use its nuclear weapons to destroy Moscow and the Soviet Union. This triggered a huge debate among civilian strategists like Brody, Robert Osgood, Henry Kissinger, Paul Nitz, and others, who said that the doctrine of massive retaliation is not credible because it's completely unlikely that the U.S. would attack the Soviet Union. The Soviets put some special forces to Burma. Total lack of proportionality. So the enunciation of doctrine of massive retaliation stimulated thinking about the credibility of threat in the nuclear age, the credibility of threat. Ultimately, by the late 50s, the Eisenhower administration dropped the doctrine. It was so massively critiqued by the civilian strategists. When Kennedy came in he was elected John F. Kennedy in 1960, he appointed the former head of the Ford Motor Company, a Berkeley graduate, Robert McNamara, as Secretary of Defense. And McNamara had studied nuclear strategy. He knew about the Rand Corporation and the thinking of Brody and Wolstead and many other figures there. And he enunciated at another commencement address at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in 1961 that U.S. policy should not be about mass retaliation. It should be about assured destruction. That if the Soviet Union hit us, no matter how they hit us, we could hit them back and cripple their economy and the military forces. But it'd only be after we were struck ourselves in our homeland, not after such willful action. The fact that ultimately the US and the Soviet Union both developed assured destruction capabilities meant that we had mutual destruction capabilities, mutual assured destruction, and critics of the whole business called it MAD, mutual assured destruction.
So they hold both classic response and option.
Yeah, so right around the same time, McNamara articulated the concept of flexible response, saying we have to be able to respond to limited attacks with limited retaliation. Nuclear weapon massive destruction is not the panacea for all attacks. Although there's always remained intense debate about what capabilities you have to have for flexible response under 1,000 different contingencies. Any questions about what we've discussed so far? Please do read the material. It's very important that you read the material before each class. Please do not walk in here without having read the material. Okay, now, yes.
Brody, before the bomb, was a big believer in battleships as indicators of state supremacy and prestige.
Right.
Did he have similar opinions about bomb?
No, in fact, he became, first of all, he saw by the end of the war the vulnerability of battleships and the utility of aircraft carriers. You know, as military capabilities evolve and new systems come in that can make old systems obsolete, it always triggers a big debate. It goes back to the paradigm shift I mentioned by Hugh in the beginning. Some people always advocate in the original paradigm, some say no, you need a new paradigm. The battleships were considered the pièce de résistance of military capability before the war, and they were blasted to smithereens at Pearl Harbor and subsequently. And it was Billy Mitchell, the American military figure, who articulated that aircraft can destroy battleships. Well, this was heresy. Naval officer said, you know, what are you smoking? It's impossible. Yeah, well, it sucked them right to the bottom of the ocean. So Brody was able to adapt quickly to that. And in fact, he became of the view that these weapons had limited utility as destructive forces in and of themselves, but more for the political force and purpose. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Remember, you're at a time now where people are first beginning to think about what does this all mean? I'll tell you what's comparable for you today, cyber. We are in the infancy of thinking about cyber weapons. There's no major doctrine. There's no major answer in the back of the book. When do you use them? When don't you use them? What about proportionality? How do you signal their use? None of this has been written yet. You guys are going to write it. So, is there other questions back? So another core feature of the nuclear age then was to think about how do you dissuade someone from using these weapons, dissuasion. And that's under the umbrella term of deterrence. So I want to spend the last part of the time talking about deterrence. Here are some simple bullet points about deterrence, and I'm going to illustrate with a hypothetical example, and I want to talk about it. Elements of deterrence. I'm asserting this definition about how A deters B. A deters B if one, A threatens B. There's got to be a threat that if B commits a certain action X, A will punish B. B must receive the threat. A must communicate the threat effectively. Now you might think this is true, of course, if you're going to threaten someone, the other party's going to hear it. Not the case. You know, years after the Vietnam War, key feature of American strategy in the Vietnam War under Johnson said many times, we're going to bomb them to the conference table. It's a famous phrase he used. As we keep hurting them so much, they'll come to negotiate. Way after the war ended, a group of Americans, including McNamara actually, went to Hanoi and spoke to General Giap, who was the military commander of the North Vietnamese. What was your reaction to Johnson's threat for bombing to the conference table? Giap said, we never heard it. We never knew about it. We're fighting for survival. We don't follow what Johnson is saying. Speech. So the real world of complex government interaction, it's a very noisy environment. You may be hanging on every word of the impeachment vote. Other people have no idea what you're talking about. So if A is going to credibly threaten B, A has to communicate a threat to B that B receives. It's non-trivial about the assumption that B receives it. B must receive the threat. Then B must calculate that A has the will and the capability to carry out the threat, where will plus capability equals credibility. You have to have the muscle, and you have to have seemingly a willingness to use the muscle. If you have one and not the other, it's not credible. You can have all the muscle in the world, but no one believes you're going to use it, it's not credible. You can have all the desire in the world, but if you don't have the muscle, it's not credible. If you have the will and the capability, then you have a credible threat. Sorry for the typo here. B then calculates that the punishment received from A exceeds the gain from taking action X and chooses not to do it. I'm going to act. I receive a threat from another party. Threat is credible to me that they have the will and capability to carry out the threat. Then I have to calculate whether the punishment I'm going to receive once the threat is carried out is greater than the gain I receive from taking the action in the first place. It's a cost-benefit analysis. This is cost-benefit analysis. And then I don't act when I was going to act. If all of that is just a lot nested in there, then B has been deterred by A. Comments on that? Yes, sir.
What happens if B commits an action without getting caught?
If B what?
Commits an action without getting caught.
Well, this assumes that A will know if B acts. It doesn't assume that B can do something clandestinely that A is not aware of. Then you get, it's related but different kinds of calculation. Remember, this is all built around nuclear weapons, so people, you know, it's not plausible to think someone's going to use a nuclear weapon, no one will know about it. No. I mean, in fact, you know, the Russian use of little green men, special forces, is more along the lines you're talking about. And then they can deny that they've ever acted. When they went into Crimea, they said that it wasn't us, it was somebody else. There was a well-known television comedy show on at the time with David Letterman. Have any of you heard of David Letterman? And he once was on right after Putin and talked about denying being in Crimea. And Letterman said, no, those aren't Russians in Crimea. He said, of course, I believe Putin. He said, they're just little green men. They're Federal Express delivery men. They're in Crimea. If A and B both convey a threat simultaneously, and neither side chooses to act, then you have a condition of mutual deterrence. And that's been a major theme of the US-Soviet relationship for 60 years. Mutual deterrence. I threaten you, and it's credible, so you don't act. At the same time, you threaten me, it's credible, so I don't act. Neither of us act. Now, this is some of the elements, but it can be a bit abstract. So I have this example which can try to get your attention. I have to tell you, it's a hypothetical example. Don't get angry with me. It's a personal example, but it's hypothetical. Okay? So listen carefully how I apply each of the bullets to this example. I have a son named David. That's actually a true statement. David used to be 8 years old. He's a lot older than 8. He's a lot older than 8. But he was 8. Now, supposing David is not doing well in school. And I say, David, when you get home from school, you must do all your homework before you can turn on the television. Okay? One day I finish my duties early, I come home, I go into my house. There used to be something in the house called a family room. You don't exist anymore. The family room was a TV. Now years ago, way before you were born, there were no remote control devices. They didn't exist. So when I turn the TV on, you have to pull or turn a knob. You have to go right to the television and turn it on. I walk into the family room, and there's David. And he's walking toward the TV. It looks like he's going to reach out, turn it on. He hasn't done it, but he's reaching. Looks like he's going to turn the TV on. I know, it's only 3:30. He hasn't been home from school. He couldn't possibly have done his homework. Are you with me? So I say, David, if you turn on the TV, I'll break your arm. Okay? Now, what does David got to do according to this? He has to calculate. Does my father have the capability to break my arm when he's 8 years old? Yes, today, of course, he could kill me. That time, it's plausible that he would believe I have the capability to break his arm. He has to believe I have the will to break his arm. Does he think I have the will? Now, you don't know me. You don't know how crazy I am. You only just met me. He may or may not think I have the will. He has to calculate. Supposing I turn the TV on. And then supposing my father comes over and breaks my arm. Well, I get a cast, I have my friend sign the cast. I gloat and brag that I defied my father, that's what's allowed for. So if he's actually done that, then deterrence has failed. I conveyed a threat, He even may have calculated that it was credible, but in the cost-benefit analysis, the value to him of defying his father is greater than the pain of having it broken up. Plus, he may have to be out of school for a while, that's a plus. So, yeah,
Then, if you make a law, that's the kind of threat that's doesn't say of like,
I'm sorry, you're saying if I make empty threats?
if you make a lot of empty threats, it makes the law next threat less credible.
Right, exactly. If the threat is not viewed as credible because I don't have the will or I don't have the capability, then in the future, he's going to take me even less seriously, and others will take me less seriously. Very good point. Yes, sir.
It's similar to Obama's red line with like.
Exactly. So Obama said, I know something about it. I was actually involved in the government advisory group right at the time of this. I don't know if you heard what he said. You may not be familiar with it. In 2014, the Syrian Civil War had started in 2011. In 2014, Assad, the Syrian president, used chemical weapons on civilian populations in his own country. He used chemical weapons against hospitals, mosques, and schools. He killed elementary school students of his own country with chemical weapons. It was part of the civil war in Syria. Obama had made a statement saying, if you continue to use chemical weapons, we will intervene militarily against you. Now, what actually happened then was that Obama ordered the U.S. military to get ready to strike Assad and his forces and his command control system and really get deeply involved in the Syrian civil war. They were ready to go. They were ready to go on a Saturday morning. And on a Friday afternoon, he asked his chief of staff to take a walk around the White House with him, because Obama had received from Putin, whose forces were already in Syria, a statement from Putin that if the U.S. did not intervene militarily, Putin would guarantee that he would assist the Americans to remove all the chemical weapons from Syria. You following me? Obama decided that it would avoid a lot of bloodshed if Putin delivered. Of course, Putin might not deliver. But he thought Putin, this was very serious, this was on the edge of war, that Putin would deliver. So Obama chose not, he had established a red line, and Assad had crossed the red line. He used chemical weapons against his own citizens after Obama's threat. Then Obama chose not to implement his threat and instead work with Putin and the Russians to get chemical weapons out of Syria. The problem with it was they didn't get all the weapons out of Syria. They were clandestine stockpiles of chemical weapons that Assad kept, and he then used them again later on. He used them even under Trump, and Trump attacked one facility after that. So Obama's been severely chastised for not following up on his red line threat, that this reduces greatly the credibility of the U.S. These are not antiquated or childish examples. These are policies being reviewed and adopted every day by the U.S. and by other governments. The credibility of threat, the central feature of military and political diplomacy. Okay, let's go back to David for a minute. Now, what do you think, it's a little hard to gauge, what do you think of the likelihood that David would challenge me and turn the TV on anyway after I conveyed to? Well, first of all, have I threatened David? Let's go back to the first story. Have I conveyed a threat to David? Has David heard the threat, or was he too busy looking at Donald Duck or something else? Yes, he's right in the family room. We're a short distance apart. I speak up. He's got good hearing. He hears the threat. He's received the threat. Now, in his own way, David's calculating the costs and benefits. Does my father have the will to carry out the threat? How many of you think David would believe I have the will to carry out the threat? He's 8 years old. Most of you think he does not think I have the will. I'm sorry. Does David think I have the capability to carry out the threat? How many of you think? The vast majority of you think. How many of you think David thinks I have the will to carry out the threat? Only a few of you. So most of you don't think I'm credible about the will. And therefore, is that likely then that David would turn the TV on? Yeah, not sure. Yes? Let me change it. So, supposing there's a man that's coming into the window of the family room, looks like he wants to steal the TV. And I say to the man, if you try to touch that TV, I'll break your arm. Does that change your calculation about Michael at all? Why? I'm sorry, I can't quite follow. Say it.
As a parent, you are less likely to break the arm of a love as compared to a
Yes.
soldier with a threat.
Well, he's my son. I don't know if he's a rough one. You had a comment, I guess.
Yeah, I was basically going to say the same thing that when it's a stranger, the will is a lot more variable. So I mean, it's more likely to be are.
So the threat of the parent to the son seems disproportionate to the aim of the threat originally, which is to get to stop turning on the TV. Not turning on the TV is important. You have to do his homework, but doesn't rise to the level of war. But stopping the burglar from stealing TV is more closely connected to the action I'm trying to prevent. So, key point, proportionality is crucial in determining credibility. Proportionality is crucial in determining credibility. When Dulles said, we'll bomb Moscow if they go into Burma, it's a highly disproportionate threat and made it not credible. Now, can you calculate this to the 14th decimal point? No. It's a psychological, and it's human relations. It's soft. It's not easy to calculate. But we go through this every day in life. With our children, our parents, our family, our friends, our enemies, our bosses, our adversaries. You're making these calculations every day, and they are toward you. So having a measured response that's related to the proportionality of the threat is crucial to maintain credibility. Credibility is crucial to avoid conflict. Yes, sir.
So much does this change your, where they're going to be
So I can't understand a lot of what you said. When you talked about ideology,
yeah, how much will that change the situation? Because there are certain ideologies that will make it regardless.
yeah, that's right. Well, a good example of that, we've had big debates in this country is, can you deter a suicide bomber? And in general, how useful is deterrence and related concepts to terrorism? If people are motivated to the point that they're willing to give their own lives for the cause. And the debate has not been resolved, but I would say that the majority of the opinion in the US is it's not very useful, not against suicide bomber. Now, ideology is tricky because you have that right ideology, but still not be willing to give your life. Or you might be willing to give your life, but maybe not the life of your children and your mother or your wife. But I think you raise in general a good point. Different political belief systems can alter the calculation about credibility. Yes.
So that would relate sort of to the conflict the United States and Iran.
Yes, if you believe, actually, Iran is an interesting example because you had a case there where Trump, who's very prone to using the most bellicose terminology, used similar terminology in dealing with Iran. They will belong you to the end of the earth. They'll never been in, no country will ever see the kind of damage, all kinds of stuff like that. And Khomeini also said, the terrible destructiveness. He used very strong language against the Americans. What actually happened was, we know, there was an assassination of a key Iranian military leader who had been very effective in his operation of proxy forces throughout the Middle East. He was very popular, national figure in Iran. Trump ordered his assassination, which was successful, and then Iran responded by attacking the U.S. base, and now there are 50 Americans. Trump said they're all fine. Then he said some of them have headaches, and now 50 have brain damage. 50 have brain damage. But then the fighting stopped. So here was a case of huge disconnect between declaratory policy on farming to smithereens and employment policy, what they'd actually do. There's a key element in nuclear strategy, declaratory policy and employment policy. Declaratory is what you say, employment is what you do. In your own lives, has there ever been a disconnect between what you say and what you do? All the time, every day, 50 times a day. I say I'll get back to you, and then I never get back to you. So, but there's a calculation, and it's an uncertain calculation, whether you have the ability to understand how the Iranians really think through their options, and whether they'd be willing to respond more aggressively. Khomeini talked about attacking Haifa in Israel, attacking other U.S. bases. He had very bellicose language in his declaratory policy leading up to the attack. Well, what he actually did was very measured, very limited, very proportionate. And they both stepped away from the conflict. Yes, sir.
How do you reconcile the assessment of the credibility of the threat as determining whether it's a proportionate response with the strategy of this report response. That military option.
How do you reconcile this, what you say and what you do?
No, you were saying that a threat can be assessed as credible, partly based on whether or not the response is proportional. But what about, how does that get reconciled with the military strategy of disproportionate response?
Well, military strategy is, you have a lot of on-the-shelf options. Pentagon, I worked in the Pentagon for a while under Obama. They got options for everything. Vanilla ice cream, chocolate ice cream. All kinds of options. It's the leader's job to decide what option to select. So you can both have lots of options, some of which are proportionate, some of which are not. You can say a lot of things, some of which are proportionate, some of which are not. Depends what it is your objective is. Obviously, in this case, Trump wanted to demonstrate a willingness to hurt the Iranians where it counted. Very, almost an irreplaceable leader. He also might have wanted to do it totally unrelated to this for domestic political purposes. There was a wag the dog story here that he wanted to attack to get Americans to think not about his impeachment of the election, but about national security issues. So, but you've got a whole range of capabilities and intentions, and you have to decide what to match up. Probably a weak response that I've given to you. Is that clear? Not so clear.
Yeah, I appreciate the response. I have some questions I'll ask.
Okay. Other thoughts? I want you to think about this. All the people who are not speaking, speak. Get the brain going. Yes, sir.
Would you say that the U.S. has lost credibility in using nuclear weapons when we're not being directly threatened with nuclear weapons against U.S. territory? For example, like during JFK's presidency with the Berlin crisis and with Cuba, when many civilian strategists thought that using nukes to take out military installations of Russia would have been appropriate.
So this is an important point. We have a history now that we can refer to, and that's what you're doing. And again, there was no answer in the back of the book. Every time there's a new crisis and a new leader has to think it through. But now the accumulation of these events suggests that the United States is not going to use nuclear weapons unless it itself is attacked, or unless something of extreme value to the United States is attacked. Otherwise, it will use other ones, conventional weapons, cyber weapons, space weapons, but not nuclear weapons. That seems to be the track record. It's also been true of our adversaries. How many nuclear weapons have the Russians use? Zero. How many the Chinese use? Zero. How many of the North Koreans use? They've got estimates 20 to 60 weapons. How many do they use? Zero. It's obviously not a weapon you just use casually. But it does mean that you have to be careful when you're in these difficult situations. Do you have other weapons that are credible that can be used?
We're going to give you a hypothetical example. So what if David found on the TV and what do you need to that?
Right, so then, and Mansuk, that's a great question. So what happens if deterrence fails? David says he doesn't have credit. He doesn't have the will to break my arm. That's nonsense. So he turns it on. Now, am I obligated then to break the arm? No, No. I just said that, that doesn't mean I have to do it. I could say no allowance for 3 weeks. You can't see your friends. No ball games, or whatever is a value thing. So I changed my, capability to fit, make it more proportionate. And that's what I would have done. And that's what countries do too. That's what happened here in Iran. They each acted in a fairly dramatic way, but often compared to all the things they could do, there was nothing compared to what they could do. And yet it's completely disconnected to the language they used before. It's hugely inflammatory on both sides. Yes.
So the case between that between you and David is similar to a large country and a smaller country. If a larger country makes a threat, they have more options generally to adjust their threat because of the power imbalance.
Yes, I think that's right. I think you're right. That the Michael David analogy is large country, small country. But that's why it gets tricky. So you get two large countries. Mutual deterrence. That's what the Cold War was a struggle for all those decades. Not obvious. I can tell you, some of us go through it. Not obvious. This would be a non-nuclear era. Maybe you don't know about it, but children grew up in school with drills where you have to get under the table, allegedly, to protect you from a nuclear blast. Done a lot of good. This was serious business. People couldn't, or I might get into this a little later in the semester, but if I don't, the Cuban Missile Crisis. How many of you are familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis? Only some of you. Interesting. The majority were not familiar. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, in October '62, the Soviets sent nuclear-armed missiles to Cuba. And they turned out they gave them to Castro, and his forces had the ability to fire them on their own. We know that now. We know that then. This was top secret. It was picked up by U.S. reconnaissance aircraft. This was before satellites. And Kennedy went on national television on a Monday night and informed the nation that there were nuclear-armed missiles in Cuba that were aimed at either the U.S. East Coast or countries in the Western Hemisphere, Central and South America. And he said two things. One was, he said, if any missile is fired from any of those arsenals or any target in the Western Hemisphere, this would require a U.S. retaliation against Moscow and the Soviet Union, U.S. nuclear weapon. Now, that's not unfortunate today. And then he ordered a so-called naval quarantine. Quarantine is a polite term for blockade. He didn't use blockade. He didn't use the term blockade because blockade is an act of war in international law. He didn't want to be accused of committing war, but it was used. U.S. naval forces went into the Caribbean to intercept ships that were coming to Cuba with missiles. And the first thing that he did, that speech, was an act of deterrence. To deter them from using the weapons to attack. But the second, the quarantine, and the aim of the quarantine was to get the Russians to deploy missiles, was a different term which we haven't discussed. I'll get into it next time. Called compellence, not the term. Compellence, which is to compel someone to stop doing something they're already doing. They already put missiles in Cuba. There's a big difference between compellers and deterrents. Compellers is much more difficult to. Okay, well, thank you. We'll check next time. Yes, and take a